Well, good evening, everybody. And can you hear me okay? Sound check? Oh, yes, it works. Okay, good. All right. All right. It's the first thing that worked all day for me. I don't know. All right. Well, anyway, thank you all for coming out here. And I don't know how many times, this is like about the fourth time we've done the Speedway Public Library. And I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. What the hell are you doing here? What's the matter with you people?
No. Pizza, retired.
Oh, all right then, okay.
Raining outside.
Well, bless you all. Yeah, in fact, great weather, huh?
Yeah.
I really thought that the weather might hold your crowd down a little bit, but no. All right, they're racers. They must be racers. Anyway, bless you all. I've as I've said in past meetings, I really enjoy doing this particular event and events like it, but this one stands out because a lot of the things that we've been doing in the spring for the last few years now, going out on the road, we've done Chambers of Commerce, and we've done Rotary and you know, the service organizations. And so if we drive 100, 150 miles, a couple of hundred miles to go speak to a service group, we are this week's speaker. And if you go back and look at the old tapes of this, I'm probably repeating some of the lines, but you know, last week it was a guy trying to sell insurance, and next week it's going to be somebody running for office or selling manure or something, and we just happen to be this week's speaker, and we hope that at least some of the people in the audience care about what we're doing. And the pleasant surprise has been that they do. And I think probably the biggest surprise that we had was a couple of years ago, we did Lexington, Kentucky. And I thought, boy, that's going to be a hard sell. It's just going to be horse people. And we had a huge group. It was like 120 people. And then I asked, how many people here, this is Lexington, Kentucky. I said, how many people here go or have been to the Indianapolis 500? And it was well over half, solidly over half. And that really surprised me because I just figured they're horse people down here and they don't care about racing. Well, it could be that the 500 is the only automobile race that they go to all year. But the fact was that everywhere we've gone, there's enthusiasm. And if it's not for everybody, there's a lot of, you know, and so it's just been just really amazing where we've gone a little further afield and thinking, okay, well, this one's going to be a tough sell. There's race fans all over the place. But anyway, so the point is that we do a number of those type functions. But when we do something like this, you read about it and decided whether you wanted to come. We're not this week's speaker. If you didn't care about what we were doing here, you wouldn't have come. But it's so flattering to me that so many of you keep on coming back. I know for some of you, you've done several functions this year that I've attended, and I'm thinking, God, I'm going to have to get some new material. And one of the things that we're going to do in a few minutes is, as in the past, we've got some stuff to, quote, give away, end quote, except we ain't exactly going to give it away. You're going to have to earn it. And we're going to do that in the form of trivia questions, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And we've got 3 sets of qualification tickets for the 500. So either the 18th or the 19th, it'll have to be one or the other. You can't use them the second time. And then also we have 2 sets of Grand Prix tickets, which, as you know, it's not a Formula One race, it's the Indy car race that opens what used to be the month of May. And those are general admission tickets. You will not be entitled to a seat, but typically the road race, the idea is that you roam around and sit on the mounds and move from spot to spot. And so when we get to this in a few minutes, we'll pose the question, and we will ask that if you would raise your hand if you think you know what the answer is. please don't yell out. And if you would raise your hand, and then we'll pick what we think is the first hand in the air and give you an opportunity to answer. And if the first person doesn't get it within reason, we'll keep on going until we get a winner. And by golly, I realize I'm going to have to come up with some new material, because not only are this group of many of the people have been to previous ones where I've used the same question. This actually happened last year. We did the Greenfield Chamber of Commerce, did some questions. The next week, we were in Brownsburg. And so I asked a question which we thought was fairly heavy duty, and a guy raised his hand and got it immediately. And so he came up afterwards, and we both noted, boy, you got that very easily. He said, well, actually, I won the same question at Greenfield last week. And so the guy got 2 sets of tickets with one question. So we thought, okay, we're going to have to either ramp it up a little bit or else come up with some new stuff. So we'll do that in a little bit. This will sound like a joke, but it's quite serious. Hands in the air, please, if any of you are now or have ever been a yellow shirt. I thought it would be more. Okay. What about those of you that, other than if the weather won't encourage you, but how many of you have thought you'd ever like to be a yellow shirt? A few. All right. Very good. All right. I've got a little bit of information for you, and this is quite serious, so I'll pitch it a little bit here. They really need people, and that is for throughout the what used to be the month of May. It's not quite a month anymore. And you don't have to commit to every day. Some people say, well, I can't do it because I want to go to quals and I want to go to the race. No, they need you. If you, could work like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday practice, that's an issue, because a lot of people that work the weekends, they got a job, they can't do it. And so the kind of the pros and cons, there are, for those people that raise their hands that they've done it or do it or have done it, will tell you that there are people that have done it 35 and 40 years. I don't know what the house record would be right now, but I know that over the years there have been people that had very long runs, and there were husband and wife teams, retirees, but not necessarily. People take a vacation. I know there's a number that are from other parts of the country, actually take a vacation and come back here to work and be a yellow shirt. College students, as I say, retirees or people that want to take a vacation, husbands and wives. So if you or you know anybody that wants to do it, you can. I've got a little bit of info here on a card, but basically, if you just go to the admin building on the corner of what used to be 16th and Georgetown, nothing stays the same, and in fact, the skylines even changed this week, so it's constantly changing. But anyway, if you go in there to the where you would turn right to go to tickets, the switchboard's right in front of you. Go to the left, and they will be very happy to talk to you. It's not just the 500 and May. It's the Brickyard. It's the air races. It's SVRA. It's ladies golf, and various and sundry others. And and then also they do special events. And as I tell people, and I've talked to this group before, so go back and get the tapes, and this is basically a recap of what I've said in the past, is that you won't necessarily get pits or garage area the first year, but you will be on the grounds. You will not be at Eastgate Shopping Center loading buses to go to the track. You'll be at the track. And but the other thing too is that if you get turn 3 or the grandstands or the infield or whatever it is, you have credentials, you have access. And I think I've told this story in the past. A.J. Foyt, when he was driving the Sheraton Thompson Special for the Anstead-Thompson Racing, that was a partnership between Bill Anstead, who had the Anstead Rotary Specials with Pat O'Connor and Don Freeland and on and on and on. And then his partner was Shirley Murphy, who was a man. I think he was one of the largest shareholders of Sheraton Hotels and a very prominent Indianapolis businessman who actually told me when I met him that he had gone to every 500. He'd gone to the 1911 500 as a little boy and never missed a race. So what he was doing, and when I first showed up, he was on the safety patrol. And that's before we had yellow shirts. That was the blue outfits, the woolen, you know about that? All right, the woolen police shirt and the pants, a tie. I don't know why a tie, but they wore a tie. And they had the whistle and the chain and the badge, and then the pith helmets. And the rank and file was silver, and the heads of the different departments were gold. So anyway, Shirley Murphy, Mr. Shirley Murphy, would sign on to the safety patrol every year. And so I had conversation with him, and normally he would be by himself, but you see him in Victory Lane, and you see him in a lot of the shots. And he said, the reason that I do this is two reasons. Number one, he said, if I wear a suit and tie, you know, I just, you know, if I dress like this, I just sort of merge in with the crowd, and I like to be by myself. He said, but the other thing is, I can go anywhere I want. I have more access with my safety patrol credentials than I would as a car owner. And so maybe that's just overselling it a little bit, but if you have any interest, okay, this is just very, very basic info on how to re-up and everything, and they will be very, very happy to see you. So perhaps when I don't know if anybody interested right now, I was going to say when we're done here, we're going to wrap up around 7:30, and you can come see me, or if there's somebody down that's handy that's got their hand in the air right now, we can take care of that. No hands in the air? No? Okay. Yes, all right, there's one back there. Would you mind handing that one back? Thank you. Yep. And then anybody else, just get me later. But anyway, it's a lot of fun and you know, a lot of camaraderie, and so might want to consider it. There's a new exhibit coming up at the museum, which is about a week away, approximately. And for the last 3 years, or maybe a little more, they've done a featured exhibit normally as a tribute to a driver or a team. And so for those of you that are you know, semi-regular visitors to the museum, there's been Dan Gurney, Foyt, Penske, and Unser family. And then most recently, a very popular one was short track with the midgets and sprints and Silver Crown cars and Darland and Vogler and Steve Butler. Anyway, that's all moving out right now. And in 3 or 4 days, they'll be up and running with the next one, which is a tribute to Mario. Excuse me just a second. And obviously, there'll be a lot of Mario celebration this year because it's the 50th anniversary of him winning the 1969 500. So Mario will be here, there, and everywhere, and very strongly represented in the museum. And there's, I'm not sure how many cars are coming, but it represents many of his victories, and including the Daytona 500, and lots of photos, memorabilia, you know, trophies and uniforms and pit boards and all this kind of stuff. So, and that'll be up for about 6 months. So let's see, what else do we need to cover here? Obviously, 103rd running coming up, you all know that. Probably you could tell me more that's going on now than I could tell you. The number of car driver combinations now is what, 28 or something like that, I think. I don't think we're at 33, or maybe, because there were a number of, the list I saw a little while ago had a number of to be announced drivers, and I think that many of them are resolved now. So how many will we have? I don't know. It's not like it was when we used to watch Jim Wilson on Channel 8 every night to see what the latest entries were in February and March. Now we have to wait for the entry list. I don't think we see anything until after the road race is over, is when we see the first entry list. And in the immortal words of Mike Helton, it is what it is. But golly, I miss, the January announcements and the February announcement that we carry all the way through the spring, that Sonny Yates had a ride, or Greg Weld, or whatever it was. Now it's different. We get, ta-da, there's the entry list. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one, but there's not very long to wait. I'll tell you what, let's start out and we'll, quote, give some stuff away, okay? So I know I needed to kind of ramp it up a little bit this time, or maybe have some fun. So a couple of you here that have been to several of these already this year will understand the inside on this one. And that is, my first question will be, and please, would you raise your hands? Please don't call out. If you think you know the answer, would you please raise your hands? And the first one is, name the driver who by winning this year would become a 4-time winner. Hands in the air, please. All right, I think the hand in the back there was the first, I believe. What do you? Elio Castroneves is correct. Somebody guessed Will Power the other day. And along those lines, little inside one here. We'll wrap this one up a little bit, okay? All right. In 1971, the Victory Circle, or the Victory, what was the Victory Lane, the Victory, whatever you want to call it, because it's changed names several times, became situated in the horseshoe area in front of the master control tower. And the first person to come into the new Victory area was Al Unser. So the question is, hands in the air please, prior to that, Victory Lane, as it was then known, was at the south end of the pits. You either come down the pit lane or on the track, and then hang a left to go onto this grass area where Victory Lane was. Hands in the air, who was the last person? Oh, yes, on the end. Yes, yes.
Al Unser.
Al Unser is correct, okay. And not to embarrass anybody, since this is being taped here, yeah, you get the choice. All right, very good. So we did this the other day, and so who was the last person to enter the old Victory Lane at the south end of the pits? Lloyd Ruby. Had to win. So anyway, we've had some very interesting answers, but not too, and that went down the drain. So would you edit that out, please? Because that didn't work out at all. All right, okay. All right, hands in the air, please. What was the name of the bar on 16th Street where all the race drivers used to go? Boy, that's about a tie between these two. You're the boss. Which one? It was about a dead heat. All right, yes, sir.
White front.
The White Front. Surely good. I don't think I've used that one before. Normally, in in Lexington, Kentucky. They probably don't know about the White Front. But God, I had a lot of happy memories from the White Front. Those were great days. No, really, just hanging out with the participants and the stories I would hear. Thursday night was movie night, right? The fellow would set up a 16 millimeter projector, and around 6:30 or so, they'd start running the movies. And they had to be done at a little, 8:30, quarter to 9, because the live music would come on at 9 o'clock. We wanted more movies. And it was so great, 16 millimeter movies, and when it was 500 films, there would be drivers in the film that were in the audience, and so if there was a spin, there'd be like a huge cheer and great times. All right, we got two. All right, we got 2 sets of qualification tickets left. So, all right, let's go way back. There used to be a track across from the Speedway, West 16th Street Speedway, and for several years, they ran all summer, but for several years, the night before the 500, they would run 3 midget programs where they would start in the afternoon, hot laps, qualifying, trophy dash, heats, semi, feature, and then when that was over, they'd clear everybody out of the grandstands, and then the people would then immediately form the line to come back in again, and they'd clear up the grandstands and then start selling tickets. So then you'd come in for the evening program, and the outcome of the first feature had no bearing on what happened next. Hot laps, qualifying, 80 cars or something, time trials, heats, and then another feature. They clear them out again and then do another one. And then I think it was sort of like maybe 10 o'clock at night, the third program. Hot laps, qualifying, heats, and then the feature. And the feature would end about 2:30 in the morning. Anyway, in 1956, hands in the air please, the same driver won all 3 features. Who won all 3 features at the 16th Street Speedway? You already won, but what you got? All right? No, I don't see any other hands in the air? Yes, sir.
Roger Ward.
It was not Roger Ward. Throw this in. That's not a bad guess, but Roger Ward was in the 500. So if you were in the 500, you could not run because of the 24-hour rule. All right. Yes, sir. It was not Foyt. Foyt was there. Foyt participated. In fact, I was talking with him about that today. All right, you first in the back.
Bobby Grimm.
It was not Bobby Grimm. Yes, sir.
Vukovic.
Not in 1956. No. Yes, sir. Plus, he would have been in the 500 anyway.
Was it Shorty Tillman?
It was Shorty Templeman. Yes. Very good. Very good. So Vukovic in 1956, no, the double whammy. Templeman had run into 55 500, but he had not qualified in 56. So, all right, I'm still going to do one more. Oh, golly. I should keep ramping it up. I've got some, of course, which are probably a little easier to get. We had fun with this last year. Let's have fun with it again, okay? We'll just be real easy here. I love goofy trivia. So if you've already won a prize, then please, for those of you that haven't got one yet, we know for sure one female will be in the races here. There's a possibility of second, but we know that there's one will be on the entry list. What is the surname of the only female that we know definitely is going to run this year? Yes, sir.
Pippa Mann.
Pippa Mann. So the answer is, what's the surname of the only female? Mann. And I love that. I mean, is that great trivia or what? And so, sorry, sometimes that doesn't get much of a response, but I think, You can't make this stuff up. All right, I think it's lost on a lot of people. Anyway, so for a while now, I know that the block of time was from 6 until 8, and we actually have to be out of here at 8. Jeez, how about 11? No, all right. No, all right then. Okay, no, still no, still on. Oh, that's the cameraman applauding. I mean, you'd think he'd want to go home early, but no. So we're going to probably we'll wind down around 7:30, because I know that we'll do one-on-ones with some of you, and if I haven't expressed this in the past, I'll change things around here a little bit. I'll throw out my disclaimers for Q&A, but I think all of you probably are very familiar with what they are. I don't like controversy. I enjoy telling anecdotes, except that I don't want to keep telling the same ones over and over and over again. I'm about the people. I'm not a gearhead, as I've said in the past. Definitely don't like controversy, and those are the things that seem to stick in people's minds. But I've been blessed to spend a lot of time with the personalities, the drivers and the mechanics and the broadcasters and the officials, not just the drivers. And I've just picked up some anecdotes that I really enjoy telling. So that's what I would like to concentrate on. And then the other thing too is that I enjoy hearing people's stories. And so when people come up and want to tell me about their tradition and all of that kind of thing, and I have to say, it's funny, a lot of people, they will tell you where their seats are. I have no idea. If you're in Grandstand L, I don't know where that is, because I've never memorized the seating. But anyway, I love to hear the stories, because there may be a gem in there. I love to learn something that I didn't know. So anyway, so as far as the Q&A, please, if you would be gentle with me and ask me happy questions rather than some of the gloom and doom that's happened out there. And then another thing too is that while I'm still obviously involved in it, I'm not as up to date as I was. And then if you ask me about my opinions on changes that have been made for this year, or what I think will come next year, or the future, I don't do that. I happily live in the past, and I work for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, so I have to be careful on some of my opinions, and it's probably better to just, so I just try to keep it bright and breezy. So, questions? Anybody want to talk about the white front or Shorty Templeman? This is what I love. Yes, sir.
What personality or driver would you like to talk about that you never get asked about, that you think is an interesting story or has an interesting...
Yeah, I didn't quite follow you.
What driver or personality related to the race would you think has an interesting backstory that you never get asked about?
Drivers with an interesting background that I never get asked about. Boy, I wouldn't know. I don't know that there's really one that jumps out at me. I know that some of the guys that I got to know and liked the best were the guys in the back, and then especially after I was already working at USAC, then that's when my heart would bleed for Ronnie Duman and the people like that had come up the hard way, and their whole thing was driving in the 500. And the way that seriously, the number of people that have told me, I drove in the 500 once and it changed my life. It opened all kinds of doors. Just the difference between being in it or not being in it made a difference. And so that's really not answering your question, except that picking out a personality, that I don't know how I would do that. Sorry, that's I'd think about it for a while, and I still wouldn't. Because there was Ruby, and there was Roger Ward, and there was Norman Hall, and Len Sutton, and Bill Cheeseburg, and Judd Larson, and you can just name anybody, and they had interesting lives. I'll tell you one that is kind of a surprise was Jimmy Daywalt. Jimmy Daywalt from Wabash, and I'm just picking this out as an example. He was very boyish in appearance as a driver, and in 1954 he was on the front row, and George Sally told me, and maybe I shouldn't be passing this on, but George Sally told me that Jimmy Bryan didn't care for Daywalt, and I don't really know why. And maybe there were some things about Daywalt that that Jimmy Bryan didn't know. And that is that as youthful as he looked and as youthful as he was, he had actually caught the tail end of World War II. And not only was he in the military, he ferried bombers from neutral point to the front, and then pick up another bomber and fly it back. So he flew. Not in combat, but he's in uniform in World War II. And then also, he was a very accomplished skater, roller skates and ice skates, and actually performed. And somebody said one time, I think it might have been a family member, or somebody said that at one point, there was it was kind of a toss-up as to whether he was going to be a performer on the road in shows or be a race driver. And then the other thing that I'd like to know more about was that he was in the Army Air Corps band, and he played the drums, and occasionally, if the regular drummer wasn't available, Daywalt would play the drums. And I thought, Jimmy Daywalt played the drums for a 16, 17-piece outfit doing Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey, I'd love to know more about that. So I don't know whether really that's helping you very much. And then he became involved in the unions and was sort of like a union rep after he was no longer driving, or at least when he was still down to just doing the 500 only. And he drove trucks and tankers, and became involved as a union guy, and it just seemed like he was involved in several different things that you would never think about, and so there were. Probably not explaining it very well, but I just loved it. Some of the backgrounds of these people were really interesting, and I'm probably stumped at this moment, but I'll probably think of some more like that were just real surprises when you'd find out about them. Well, I'll just, as far as serving in the military, it used to be, and I'll be with you in just a sec, but if you went to, 51, 52, 53, 54, and look at the lineup, 55, probably 2/3 of the drivers had been in the military. And, they'd been in the Marines, and they'd been in the South Pacific, and the Navy, and all of that. And not only are we not doing that anymore, but the last 3 people that I know that did service, probably the most recent driver in the 500 that had did military time was Donnie Beechler. And I just found that out recently, because I thought it had been a tie between Steve Chassie. There were 2 drivers that we know were in Vietnam. Steve Chassie and Pete Halsmer. And Halsmer was a chopper pilot in Nam. And to spend any time with them, he just looks like a college kid. He doesn't, you don't think of somebody having a background like that. So, no telling what his experiences were. And then Chassie was ground infantry, but he was a sergeant. Having said that, I think Hurley Haywood also was a chopper pilot or had a World War, not a World War, but had a military background overseas. And Hurley Haywood is somebody where you think, well, he didn't do any military. Yes, he did. But I don't even know where I'm going with that. All right, yes, sir. Yeah.
Thanks for being here tonight. This is so much better than at WIPC. We
I-
got you all the time, no commercials. So much
Oh,
better.
all right. Well, thank you very much. But you've got a page of notes there, so this is serious stuff.
I'm not gonna
Just
go
a-
wrong.
just a
And
few
just
questions.
Another note, you mentioning the local favorites pulling for the hard luck guys. Another
Yes.
one comes to mind. I used to deliver papers right next to his house. Chuck Brody.
Oh,
He
yes.
lost his life in the first turn during Paul's one year. But
Yes.
that was just a side thing. One of my classmates, he has a very close connection with this story from a race that is very locally grown. Just the kind of story you like. I wonder what you know about the Palmer Special from 1947.
Dick Palmer, Dick and Richard Palmer. It was a father and son. It was Palmer Construction Company. There was a fellow named Bill Castle, who is that who you're talking about
Jerry
that
Castle,
lived in
Bill
Speedway?
Castle, and a
Yes.
guy with a real colorful name in there.
Yeah.
They had a
Okay.
gas station at Girard and 136, Crawfordsville Road.
Gerard and 136.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Who's Your King? Who's Your Pal? Who's Your King?
Who's your Pete? Was it?
Yeah,
No.
Hoosier Pete.
Who's Your Pete? Yeah.
And this
Murphy's
car was
owned it too.
of great interest because it was built by local Speedway guys.
Well, okay. This is getting really heavy duty now, but the Palmer Specials were Hal Robson, pronounced Robeson, but it was really Robson.
Yeah.
And I'll be doing all kinds of tangents off of tangents here, but I always pronounced it George and Hal Robson. But when I got over here, it was Robeson. And so I thought, but it doesn't have an E. If it was R-O-B-E-S-O-N, it would be Robeson. R-O-B-S-O-N is Robson. And so, of course, George was long gone by the time I showed up, but I met Hal, and I asked him about that. I said, what's the pronunciation of your name? And he said, Robson. I said, well, all I hear is Robeson. He said, George and I just finally got tired of telling the announcers, so we just said, okay, fine. But anyway, so it was 1948, and 47 and 48. Dick Palmer actually took his test in 1948, but that's as far as that went, and then Hal drove it in the race. And then also Bayless Leverett drove the Palmer Special. I don't get to throw that name out very often. With relief from Bill Cantrell, and there were two Bill Cantrells. if you look at the entry list from 48 through 52, well actually 48 through 53, there's a Bill Cantrell, except that the one that's entered in 53 is not the one that was entered in 52. That was Billy Cantrell from the West Coast. Bill Cantrell was from Louisville. Anyway, you want to know about the Palmer Specials, and I was going to tell you about Chuck Rudy.
And then the missing name of the guy that had the station, which is probably the Hoosier Pete at Girard across the road, was Sparky Sparks.
Well,
He was one of the builders of the car, along with Dave Schnabel and the Castles.
was that Bill Sparks that worked for Allison's?
I don't know, but it was, yeah, it may have been.
There was a Bill Sparks who just went by Sparky,
Yeah, I think that was him.
and he was on. He became an official, but he'd been on several teams, worked with Jack Beckley, and he was the one that told me that there's a number of myths over the years, or stories that have turned out that they're not as reported. And I've made an effort to try and, put what I believe is the correct version out there. And in some cases, I've been Mr. Poop because I've taken credit from one person and give it to another, and just hoping things would be right, and sometimes it's backfired on me, and that's as far as I'm going to go with that. But anyway, he told me, and you didn't ask me this question, but here's another opportunity to try and dispel a myth. The myth is that in 1950, Johnny Parsons, on race morning, the crew discovered a crack in the block, and that he went out to lead as many laps as he could before the inevitable breakdown. And when the race was stopped at 345 miles because of rain, he was saved because the race was stopped before the engine had a time to, the block had a time to, split further. So that's the story, and that's still going around today. But Sparky, and I don't know if that's the same one we're talking about, but I'll tell the story anyway. He said on race morning early, he said we were standing around, and then we noticed that there was some little beads of liquid that were on top of the block. And so he said we took a rag and wiped it off, and 15 minutes went by and they were there again. And so I think that happened a couple of times. And then he said, Harry Stevens, who was the chief mechanic, said, don't tell anybody about this, we'll fix it. And he said, what we did, we got some rags and little blocks of wood, put it alongside the block, and he said, we gently pained, because what we figured out was that it was porosity in the metal. Now, I'm not a gearhead, I'm not a techie, but I memorized this. And he said it was porosity in the metal. And he said by gently tapping it, we were able to seal the opportunity for the liquid to come to the surface. Well, in the meantime, trying to keep a secret in the garage area on race morning, good luck. And so the word got out there, Parsons has a cracked block. And he went ahead, led a lot of the race, and then when it was stopped at 138 laps because of rain, then he was declared the winner. So Sparky told me that story in the USAC office one day, and that around the time, Frankie Delroy talked to me about the cracked block. And because the car was a partnership between Ed Walsh and Frank Curtis. And the night before the race, or a couple of days before the race, Jim Robbins became the car owner, but the arrangement was that he wouldn't take delivery, he wouldn't share in the prize money, he wouldn't take delivery of the car until after the race. So they did that, and then I think it ran a couple of times that year as all, but it ran Darlington for the final race of the year at Darlington, believe it or not, and Joey Chitwood drove it, and Frankie Delroy was the mechanic by this time. Anyway, so in 1951, the winning car from the year before was entered with Mike Nazaruk, who was a rookie, and Delroy was the mechanic. And he said, we knew about the problem with the block, but he said Jim Robbins didn't want to spend any money. And he said, we actually kept that thing running. And he said, when Nazaruk finished second in 51 and did the entire 500 miles, it was the same block. So I just wanted to try and dispel that myth, which will not go away. It'll be in print probably this month, and did you know, and all this kind of stuff. So Chuck Rohde, if I could just go back on to Chuck Rohde, he lived on Nestor, which is about a third of a block. He's from Chicago, but he lived on Nestor. The house is right on the corner. When you're south of the junior high, and Nestor goes about probably, I don't know, can't be any more than about 4 houses, about a third of a block, and then it stops where the railway used to be. So they had the garage there, and so Rohde did his own mechanical work, as a lot of them did. And he very often would have two midgets. There was the Ed Lanowski number 87, which he maintained and drove himself. And he would normally have a second car in there, offies. And so they would wrap up an overhaul job, and it would be 11 o'clock at night. We want to see if it's running okay. So we fire it up, don't we? And push it up and down the road and just motor a little bit. So, or they would just fire the engine up and run it in the garage, and there would be calls to the police station, and a police officer would come over, and it's Chuck Rudy with the midget. And so he'd hang out, and they'd chat, and 20 minutes, 25 minutes would go by, and then another police officer would come to find out what happened to the first one. And then the other thing, too, was that Rudy, A.J. Watson and Roger Ward had a gas station, and they had a speed shop. But the gas station was where Jim Bob Lubert's stitching post is now. That was a mobile gas station owned by Roger Ward and A.J. Watson, and Rhodey was the service manager. We don't have any service managers driving in the 500 anymore. But golly, a lot of other Rhodey stories. I don't even remember what your question was, but it was about the Palmer special. Yeah, what the heck. And I all kinds of things were occurring to me, because these are the kind of things that I like to talk about.
Well, just one more word, because
yes.
My classmates in Wisconsin, he couldn't be here, loves the 500. His dad helped build the car, named Dave Schnabel. Just wondered if you remember that name, along with the Castles and Sparky Sparks.
No,
Schnabel was one of the builders.
I don't remember that name. No, sorry.
Okay.
All right, way in the back.
Back in the 50s, the 500 counted for the World Driving
Yeah.
Championship.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered if any of the drivers who won points in the 500 toward the World Championship actually drove in some other Formula One
Okay.
races.
That's actually how I first learned about there was a thing called the Indianapolis 500, because it counted towards the World Drivers' Championship. And in retrospect, it didn't make any sense, but they were making it up as they went along. There was no World Championship for drivers until 1950. And they would proclaim various champions and so forth. But in 1949, the motorcycles, what was then 500cc, now it's MotoGP, and anyway, but in 1949, it was decided, let's declare a champion by awarding points to the major events. And so then the FIA thought, well, let's do that for Grand Prix racing. And so for 1950, was the first year, and it was the World Drivers' Championship. And I think they had like 6 Grand Prix. There was Great Britain at Silverstone, Monaco, the Swiss, Belgian, and Italian, and I think that might have been it. The German Grand Prix didn't count the first year, the French Grand Prix. And so the American delegate, who was a dear old man named T.E. Pop Myers, was the American rep, and he said, well, there's no United States Grand Prix right now, but surely the Indianapolis 500 should count, because that's the biggest race in the country. And so they agreed, because there'd always kind of been a connection with the 500 and Europeans and courting. I mean, the foreigners coming to the 500 is not new. They've been courting them since before World War I. And so anyway, the Indianapolis 500 counted. And the idea was that Grand Prix drivers would maybe come to Indianapolis because they could get points, and that maybe the Europeans would go over there. It didn't really work out. And although there were always rumors, the only example of because Fangio came, Farina came and didn't make it. So during that period, which was from 1950 to 1960, the only Grand Prix driver who qualified for the 500 was Alberto Ascari in 1952. And he passed up a Grand Prix. I think he passed up the Swiss Grand Prix so he could stay here for the month. Now, a good one. We don't have any tickets to give away. There was only one Indianapolis 500 driver who drove in a European Grand Prix during that period. It was an American driver, had one start in an honest-to-goodness Grand Prix. It was the French Grand Prix. Can anybody tell me who that was? Yes?
Jimmy Bryant.
It was not Jimmy Bryan. Yes, sir. In 19, no. The year was 1958. Yeah. Andretti was 15 at that time, or 18 or something. All right.
How about the youngest Indy 500 winner?
You got it. Troy Ruttman. Yes, Troy Ruttman. And and that was the year where he had not qualified for the 500. But he went to do some European races, and it was short-lived. But he actually drove a 250F Maserati in the French Grand Prix. And it was the same race that Phil Hill made his debut, and there was somebody else as well. But anyway, that doesn't matter, because I'm kind of getting probably a little ridiculous here. But so it made no sense, really, because even the drivers didn't know that they were scoring a point. And that's how I first learned about the Indianapolis 500, because you'd see the box score with the points that were accrued at each Grand Prix by each driver. And there was this one line with 8, 6, 4, 3, 2 with driver. And I thought, who the hell, who's Vukovic? Who's Nazarek? I don't know those guys. So that was how I learned about the 500. But the other thing, too, that was funny was that the 500 drivers didn't know that they were scoring points. And Pat Flaherty, who I got to know fairly well, he said, I remember when somebody said, hey, congratulations, you were 6th in the World Championship. I said, no, no, I didn't go to Europe. I didn't race it. No, but you got 8 points. You were 6th in the World Championship for winning the 500. He said, I didn't know that. And there were several examples like that. And it gets really confusing when well-meaning statisticians and historians do a compilation of Formula One starts, and they give the Americans credit. Chuck Wyant had 4 Formula One starts. No, he didn't. And so when, and it ended, by the way, 1960 was the last season, because in 59, you had the first Grand Prix of the United States at Sebring, and then in 60 it moved to Riverside, so actually there were 2 rounds in the United States. And it had never made any sense to begin with, but it made less sense when there was a Grand Prix, and Jim Rathman and Johnny Thompson were scoring points and didn't know it. And then so all of this kind of was a major topic for several years when Formula One actually came to Indianapolis. And so the summary would be, did the Indianapolis 500 count towards the World Drivers' Championship? Yes. Was the Indianapolis 500 ever a Formula One race? No. The specs were different. And so in some ways it was neat, in other ways it didn't make any sense, and I began to realize, God, I wish they had never done that, because it's so hard to explain. But that's a longer answer than I'd normally give. I don't know if there's any other thoughts, but yeah, so the only person during that, actually 10 years, but 11 seasons, the only foreign Grand Prix driver to drive in the Indianapolis 500 during that period was Alberto Ascari, and the only American Indianapolis 500 driver to run in a Grand Prix was Troy Ruttman, one start each. Little bit of trivia that I wouldn't normally get into because it's a little heavy duty, but you're heavy duty people here tonight. In 1952, there were two drivers who drove in the Indianapolis 500, and then 3 weeks later or whatever it was, were in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Now see how good you are. Alberto Ascari was one, drove at Indianapolis and then and then Le Mans. Who's the only American that did that the same year? Yes.
Johnny Parsons?
It was not Johnny Parsons, but you're not far off. Yes.
Was it Mario?
In 1952? No. Mario was 12 and living in Italy, so no. All right. It was not Troy Ruttman.
Dwayne Carter?
It was Dwayne Carter. Very good. Was that the clue that Johnny Parsons that you closed? Was that it? Okay then. Yeah, it was Dwayne Carter. I don't know. What now?
Got to know the intertwinement of the marriages.
Oh, I know. Except that, you know what I get all the time was that Dwayne Carter and Johnny Parsons traded wives. No. Dwayne Carter married the former Mrs. Johnny Parsons, but and then Parsons got married again, but he didn't marry Dwayne Carter's. No. Boy, I'm really getting out of. But I hope you're okay with this stuff. Yes, sir.
That was a good association. Cool.
Do I now?
That was a good story, good association.
Um,
Carter and Parsons.
I had some other stuff though that I was going to throw in that I lost my way somewhere. But all right, yes, sir.
What year were the wooden garages torn down? And can you tell us the story of something that went on in the garages, the old garages?
Are you referring to something specific?
No.
No? All right then. There's a little bit of a mystery there. What most of us remember as the old garages came down after the 1985 race and then were replaced in 86 by what's there now. And so it was two banks that went from east to west, and now it's three banks that go from north to south. It never been clear. In 1941, on the morning of the race, there was a fire, and it did quite a bit of damage, and it was approximately the eastern 1/3 of the south bank. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. And to go back a little bit further, the original garage area was inside of turn 1, and it was there in 1909. They actually had barns that served as garages, and so there was a place to house cars in 1909, and golly, Daytona in the mid-70s was a carport, basically, where they would go in nose to nose and the sides would go up and down. But anyway, in 1914 is when the garage area was relocated to approximately where it is now, and it was one bank. And then in 1929, they added a second bank from the north and south going east and west. And then so after the morning fire in 1941, which was about 1/3, as I say, it was about the eastern third of the south bank was destroyed. I've never been clear about whether they replaced just the damaged area sometime either in the summer of 41, because they didn't know there wasn't going to be a 42 race yet. So how much work was done, and then how much of it had to be completed after the war, I've never been clear on that. But as far as stories were concerned, boy, it was so easy And I think there's probably a few people will know what I mean. If you had a bronze badge at least, if you had a silver, great, but if you had a bronze and you could get in the garage area, and whether you were autograph seeking or whatever you were doing, it was very easy to negotiate because you would just keep doing figure eights. And you could go through the restroom to save time a little bit. So I know that it took a lot longer to get around the new garage area than the old one had. But as far as stories, the first thing that popped up, which I don't know is quite what you want, was Clarence Cagle was the superintendent of the grounds. And boy, that guy had radar. If anything was going on, boing, 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 Clarence was right there. What's going on? I mean, how he knew, I don't know whether he had people tipping him off or he just had a sixth sense, but he was always right there. Boys, what seems to be the trouble? And so I was told this fairly, a few years ago, that one day during the summer, and this was a really neat thing that a lot of people never knew about, the garage area was pretty much the headquarters for the championship division, because some chief mechanics would keep the car in the garage next to their house. But nobody had a shop. And so the garage area, by putting in an entry, you would get the garage for the month. But it ended up being much more than that. And so they keep dirt cars in there. And Hoosier 100 time, all the dirt cars were in there. And it was just, it was like this amazingly well-kept secret that if you would go into the garage area at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or July or August, everybody was in there. But nobody knew about it. It was just this great secret, and everybody was, visiting everybody else and everything like that. And so there would be, in fact, Foyt even kept a sprint car in there. And then occasionally there'd be a stock car in there. But anyway, so throughout the summer, and then usually after the Hoosier 100, then, it was time to, go back to California to run Sacramento and Phoenix and so on and so forth. So there would be occasional antics, and there were some firecrackers and some fireworks in there one time. And so some fellows apparently were in the middle lane, and again, used to go east to west. So in the middle was they'd set up bottles, and they were firing rockets. And so apparently this one, just as it was about to take off, the bottle fell over, and the rocket went straight across into the garage across the way. And no sooner had that happened than here comes Clarence with the white shirt and the hat and the two-way radio and saying, "Boys, does anybody know anything about firecrackers?" And whoever it was that told me this, they said, "I'm facing south. Clarence is right in front of me and saying, 'Do you know anything about anybody firing off firecrackers?'" And whoever it was told me, he said, "Clarence, I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "I'm looking over his shoulder and looking at all the smoke coming out of the garage from across the way." But as far as golly, there was, I was taken very, very much into the inner circle in 1964. Which was my first year, and I'm dating myself here, but I pretty much had the run of the place. But then the real inside was on a day when the track was closed. So this would be, just 3-4 days before the race. And I remember I'm walking through the garage area, and it might have been after curbs, I don't recall, but anyway, no cars running. And there was a phone booth, and J.C. Agajanian was standing there. And he was kind of looking off into the distance, and when he saw me, he said, called me over, and he said, "Come with me." And I don't know what possessed him to do that, but there was a door open that I had never noticed before, and we go in there, and here's Sam Hanks and Roger Ward and Firestone people and a couple of the media, and there's a gin rummy game going on, because they used to play gin all the time. And so I don't know where I'm going with this, except that I I finally felt like an real insider, because I was taken to this secret place with a men, no women in the garage area in those days, just men, and they're not having fun with you on that, by the way, but they're playing gin back there. But other garage area stories, I'm sure there's a bunch. I have to think of something. All right, Gully. Yes, Scott.
I want to throw something out, if you don't mind, in the garage area. In 1985, right after the race, before they tore it down, I should say, Lee Braden, Scott Braden's father, called me and said, hey, will you prepare our garage for May? So I went to Vonnegut's over here at Speedway, bought the hardware, put the door stops, as I call them, the horse barn doors.
Yeah.
Put the door stops on there, so we open it up, they'll stay open. It cost me $78 to completely clean up the garage, paint it black and white. Walked down to Mario's garage, I asked the interior designer there how much it was to do Mario's garage with Beatrice Foods. It was $13,000. Lee Braden paid me $1,000, and I was pretty overwhelmed by that. But one thing I asked you when we were in Anderson, this is very interesting, that no green in the garage area, no green in the pits. But I always said everyone had bad luck, but someone had to win the 500 because the garages were painted green.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I did some heavy research one year, and that's another thing about research. When people say, "Well, I've done some research," well, what did you do? Well, I Googled it. No. I say, unless you made a trip or you were on your hands and knees going through dusty boxes, you haven't done research. If you just went, that ain't research. Anyway, so I did some extensive research in 2008, 2009, when it was the centennial, and I went down to the newspapers to see what I could see from the time that the track was first seriously discussed when it was built. I was making a long story out of this, but I throw it in because some of you may have done this when you went down to look at the newspaper files, and I would thoroughly recommend that, by the way, as I used to in the class. If you want to, the reporting and the standard of it in the early days was just phenomenal, and the track was so extensively covered. And whether you're interested in the track or whether you want something else, if you want to look up something or read in a bit or whatever it was, and you've got the date, look at all three papers. There's the Star, the News, and the Times, and I think there was even another one at one time. But all of the reporters, and forgive for this editorial comment here, but most of the staff were local. They were born and raised here, went through the Indianapolis school system, not all, but most of them. And then there was this great friendly rivalry between the three newspapers to have the best coverage. And so when somebody of note would pass away, you would have your obituary, which wasn't like it is now, which is it was basically a classified ad section now, but you know, if you read the New York Times, they have some fabulously written obituaries, and forgive me on that one. But anyway, you would read all three newspapers, and so there would be the obituary on the front page, but then the sports editor or one of his assistants might have a personal overview of this person. And so the point is that read all three newspapers. Well, having said that, I was going through, and golly, that was a tangent off of a tangent off of a tangent. But I stumbled on of an item one day, and I wasn't just doing sports. I mean, I actually scanned for an entire year's worth of three newspapers every section. And as you roll, it was amazing what you would find. Oh my God, the Marx Brothers appeared at the Lyric Theater, you know, or whatever it was. But so I did find this note one day that as the buildings were going up, and this is 1909, that Carl Fisher had put out the word that he wanted all of the buildings to be painted white with green trim. And I don't remember what date that was, but I can give you an exact date when that was reported. And that's before they ever dreamed of a 500. But it is ironic that green is unlucky, supposedly, but the garage area had a lot of green in it. And I could do all kinds of green stories, but let's see. God, I'm thinking all kinds of stories that I probably don't have time. Yeah, yes, sir. Let's move around the room. Why are peanuts? Who knows? There were a number of superstitions like that. And there are theories. And so if some high school kid or a reporter wants me to prove it and conclusive evidence, all I can do is offer you theories. And if you could do better than I did, then good luck. And I remember one time, this is awful. No, I won't tell this story. It's about trying to trace the checkered flag. Anyway, so peanuts, it appears, I mean, they were considered bad luck. And for many years, race drivers and race personnel tended to be very superstitious. There were a number of superstitions, and a lot of them really didn't make any sense. So the theory on peanuts is that it involved peanut shells ending up in an engine. And this could even have gone back to the Vanderbilt Cup. But certainly in midget racing, you'd have your little quarter mile stadium seating, and then sometimes the cars would be pitted, you know, virtually underneath the grandstands. And the thinking is that peanut shells could drop down and go into the injectors, and then maybe, you know, cause an engine failure or a problem. And whether there's anything to that or not, I don't know. But some were adamant about it, and Paul Russo was one in particular who avoided peanuts, just peanuts in general. And so the funny story is that when they went to Darlington in 1950 for the final championship race for the year, when Darlington was brand new, the Southern 500 had run 3 months before that, but Harold Brassington, who built the track, wanted an Indianapolis Motor Speedway in the South. And so no garage area, no track had a garage area except IMS. But where they kept them was in a warehouse, and apparently peanuts were kept in there at times, and Paul Russo about went berserk. Anyway, boy, that clock is moving around faster than you. Did somebody get up on the ladder and think, this guy's talking too much, let's move the clock up? All right, yes?
Does the go back to Gaston Chevrolet in 1920, since him and Jimmy Clark's the only two winners to win in a green car, since he got killed in Beverly Hills in 1920?
I didn't get the question exactly.
Gaston Chevrolet
yes.
in 1920 was in a green car. He won in a green car here, and then Jimmy Clark was the only, so only two drivers have won in a green car officially.
Oh.
But then Gaston Chevrolet got killed on a board track out in California. Does that
Yes.
have something to do with the green?
Did the green have anything to do with the fatal accident? Gee, I don't know. I wouldn't have the answer to that.
Superstition, because he was the winner and he was in a green car. Because there wasn't a lot of green cars between Gaston Chevrolet and Jimmy Clark.
Well, I'm really not sure what your question is.
Is that maybe why the reason why the green became a superstition?
Oh, why green became a, yeah, all right. No, good question. That's another one where there were several claims. It took me a while. I didn't know where you were going. All right. Why is green unlucky? But bottom line, we don't know. But it went back before Gaston Chevrolet. And actually, when I was first around, I had several people that claimed I started that. But it probably went back to an accident that took place at the New York State Fairgrounds in 1910 involving a car that was painted green. But why would green be unlucky? I've heard all kinds of theories, and one of them being that on a short track, like at the county fairgrounds, where things were very different then to what they are now, and you had a lot of jungle park type outfits where they were surrounded by trees, that a car painted green could potentially be lost in the color of the foliage. I don't know whether I go with that one or not. It's one of those things where there's just, it's been very, very hard to trace, and I'll just say that I tried that one, I tried the checkered flag, and a bunch of others where somebody would call me up and ask me, so-and-so and so and so and so. So I would give them all these theories and said, I don't think you're going to find out, but you know, this are the theories. And they said, well, thank you very much. I'm going to pursue this further. And I thought, well, all right. And that was on checkered flag, actually. And I said, I've read studies from the mid-50s, and I've personally talked to many of the great journalists in the world and historians, and they don't have a conclusive answer. So if you can find out something that I didn't know, good luck, and let me know what the answer is. All right, yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about the only woman car owner that won the Indianapolis 500 and who
Yes.
the driver was?
Yes, the question, who was the only female car owner and who her driver was. And that's really a tricky issue as to women in racing, honestly, and some of the various claims. But the fact is that the winning entrant in 1929 was M.A. Yeagle, and M stood for Maud. And she was married, but apparently she was the person that was the owner of the two. They were both sports people, but apparently she was the race car end of it. But it definitely was entered under her name as M.A. Yeagle. And she entered actually in 28 and 29, and then also 30, 31, and 32. But 29 was the winner, and it was Ray Keach. And this is going to get a little bit complicated here, because the car actually was owned by Frank Lockhart. And Lockhart and Ray Keach were both contesting for the world land speed record. And it seems times were very different. Could you have two Indianapolis 500 drivers who were trying to win the world land speed record at the same time and were friends while they were doing it? And Lockhart's approach was with the Stutz Blackhawk Streamliner, which had nothing Stutz about it except it was built in the Stutz building. But it was 100% Miller and Lockhart and his team of Myron Stevens and Pop Dreyer was involved in that. Anyway, they built that car in the Stutz building. So it was a 16-cylinder, which was actually an engine made out of two straight-eight Millers, little complicated to explain. But Lockhart's theory, and he had a very limited education, but he had an engineering mind, although not a student in school. And he had this theory that lighter was better. The other approach, or what he was going against, was the approach that all the land speed record cars had to be monsters. And Ray Keach was driving a car called the White's Triplex Special, which had not one, not two, but three Aero Liberty aircraft engines in it. Three! It was a juggernaut. I don't know what it weighed. But anyway, two completely different approaches. But in being down at the Daytona Beach, I mean, this is before the Bonneville days. It was Daytona Beach is what they used. And in hanging out and basically two people trying to do the same thing, they were very good friends. And so I'll give you a little tangent off of a tangent here, as I'm really watching the clock now. But when Lockhart was fatally injured, his wife, who I actually had a letter from. I never talked with her, but I corresponded with her briefly, long time ago. And so she inherited the stuff, and she sold the car to Mrs. Yeagle. And so, you know, when was the first time that a female car owner sold equipment to another female car owner? A lot earlier than you'd think. But anyway, there's really I don't know a great deal more about her. I would like to know. Obviously, she couldn't get in the garage here or anything. And I've seen a photograph, which I believe is of her, and she's wearing a business suit and a blouse and a hat, and, you know, a very formidable looking lady. And so, to the best of our knowledge, she was the owner. And golly, I've got all kinds. We need more time here. I'm thinking of all kinds of stuff that I wanted to was not so much about female car owners, but I had something now which is gone, so that's okay. Yes, sir.
Do you recall, I don't want to pin you down, a driver named Will Overdorf from the 30s, maybe?
Will Overhead.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. The story on Will Overhead is there was a newspaper in, golly, was it Wyoming? I think. It was off the beaten track a little bit. And there is a headline which was, Will Overhead wins 500. And then you read down the story, and it says that, you know, Fred Frame and Billy Arnold and you know, battled for the lead, and then in the late stages, an unknown named Will Overhead won the 500. Well, what happened was, I don't even know what the term for the transmissions would be, but information was going out there, and probably teletype, and I don't remember what all the terms were now. But anyway, there was the fellow that was working at the newspaper was taking a real interest in this. It's Memorial Day, and he's getting these bulletins, but he's looking at the deadline for the different editions. And so apparently he sent a message to say that he basically was saying, you know, let me know what the results are. And I don't remember exactly what the wording was. And so the term came back in acknowledgement, Will Overhead 500 winner, meaning that he would put that at the top of the story. Will Overhead 500 winner. And so he thought, oh, Will Overhead, I've never heard of him, but that's all right, okay. That's the story. I don't remember what the newspaper was now, but it, I think there's copies of it around, and that story's being used in the program, and so you can at least find versions of that front page with a huge headline. That's who Will Overhead was. Somebody that hasn't asked yet? Yes.
What year was that?
I'm sorry?
What year was that?
Oh, 1932.
32?
Yeah, it was Fred Frame actually won the race, but yes, sir.
Named Mike Sperling. He sponsored car number 77, Freddie Aggravation Group, late 50s, early 60s. But he owned MERS Engineering, which was right behind Duesenberg.
I'm not hearing your question.
Oh, I've never heard him connected Duesenberg and MERS. But MERS Engineering was right behind Duesenberg. But this Sperling had bought MERS and sponsored Freddie Aggravation, car 77. No?
All right, there was, I think I'm getting what you're saying. Charlie MERS was the son of an Indianapolis policeman that raced motorcycles and in the first few 500s. And he was employed by National, and then he was employed by Stutz. And then actually was the chief steward for the 500 from 34 to 39, and had quite a military background. Anyway, he started a company called MERS Engineering. And he died in 1952, but the company had already been sold to a fellow named Miklos Sperling. And so there were MERS engineering specials from 50 would be the first one, and then it went through to 55 was the last one, but that was Miklos Sperling. But it's MERZ, and it was the company that Charlie MERS started.
I worked there like 59, 58, and they still had a small shop where they worked on office.
Okay, well, where it was, I think I think the address was 912 Pearson or something like that. I don't know where I'm pulling that up from because it doesn't work for everything. But it was very, very close to Stutz. In fact, this is really going to complicate the thing now. There is a shot of the Boyle racing team all together in 1928, but it's not where they went to on 1701 North Ghent. I'm really out of control now. But where this was, I think, was 912 Pearson. And it took a little while to figure out exactly where this was, because you can see the Stutz building in the back of the shot. But it's Billy Arnold, Cliff Woodbury. I think there's 3 race cars all lined up there. And so a guy named John Pappas, who's huge with the Boyle Building Resurrection Project, figured out that was actually the parking lot of the MERS Engineering. So I'd like to know more about it, and I don't know that I didn't hear everything that you said, and I don't know whether I'm really answering your question or not. Okay. But anyway, MERS Engineering was Charlie MERS, except when they were sponsoring race cars, it wasn't his company anymore. And Agabation, did you mention Agabation? Yes, it was in 1954. In fact, a little trivia there, that was the first Indianapolis 500 car that Bignotti worked on. Bignotti was very successful in Bay Area midget car racing, very successful. And several of the drivers came back and ran the 500. Agabation and Johnny Boyd and Schweikert were all Bay Area people. And Agabation, or Bignotti said that Agabation already said, "Why don't you come back to the Speedway?" And George said, "Well, you know, I've married a lady that we've got this florist business, and so I really can't get away." But he said, "I told him, if ever you're in a bind, call me." And so he said, one day, he said, I was actually up a ladder in the florist arranging something, and the phone rang, and it was Agabation. And he said, "Help, I need you back here. We've got a good car, but the mechanic is, we need help." And so anyway, he said, I got on the plane, flew back, and he said, by the time I got there, Frankie Delroy had already been hired as the chief mechanic, but George was the engine man in '54 for Agabation, who'd won the Bay Cities Racing Association Midget Championship for him, I think 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row. And then the next year it was Walt Faulkner, finished 5th with Bill Homeyer, driving about 30 laps, I believe. But Sam Hanks drove a MERS Engineering Special, which was the old Milt Marion dirt car. But anyway, now I'm getting out of control. But Miklos Sperling was the car owner. All right, yes, ma'am.
Could you share with us a story about Janet Guthrie in her competition days?
A story about?
Janet Guthrie in her days of competition?
Janet Guthrie.
Oh, Janet Guthrie.
In her competition days.
Oh, what would you like to know? I got a lot of Janet Guthrie stories. Well, obviously she was a groundbreaker. Although females participated in other forms of motorsport, she was the first person to actually be entered and drive in the 500, not all the same year. 76 was the first entry, and she passed the rookie test, but they had a lot of engine problems, and so they actually withdrew the night before the final qualifying day. And I'll tell you a little story about that. So it was the following year when she drove in the race. And then in 1978, which was her second of 3 starts, she finished 9th. And that was the record of the highest finish by a female until Miss Danica came along. But I remember looking at the clock here and reluctantly going to have to wind down here a little bit. I didn't want to necessarily end because it was Janet, but I had met her, and she really had a bit of a tough time for it because, first of all, there were no provisions for women in the garage area. And so when it was time to go to the restroom, she had to go across the way. And I know that when I mentioned earlier about doing figure eights and the fact that you could take the shortcut, she was with Dick Simon, who was extremely helpful. He was her teammate, but extremely helpful to her. And he unknowingly took the shortcut through the restroom, and not even thinking about it. And then she got on him about leading it through there. But anyway, so anyway, on the Saturday evening, I remember going through the garage area, and it was Volstead's, which I think was garage 2 and 3 or something, right around on the southwest corner, and things were looking pretty glum, and they had decided, look, we're out of engines and we're out of money. And so the next morning, there was this story that Janet is going to drive for Foyt. And we thought, what? And they said, no, we were in the garage area last night, and Janet went into Foyt's garage, and they shut the doors, and we think she's being fitted for a car. Kidding. And so the next morning, practice on Sunday would be 10, and out come the cars, and people haven't made the show yet, and a few people doing fuel tests. And car number 1, A.J. Foyt, entrant. The driver is Janet Guthrie. What? So here comes, it was Foyt's number 1. Foyt was the national champion, and so he was entitled to 1, but he put it on a backup car because he wanted 14. And so around the inside, very, very slowly, boom, 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 here's Janet. And so she did, another lap and then picked up, and then she was, getting some speed, and the yellow came on. And I found out some of this later. And then I think she had done 6 laps when the yellow came on. They were down for a few minutes, and then she went out and she did 6 more laps. And I think her last lap was like 180.8 or something like, almost 181. It was right at bubble speed. And so we thought, well, golly, she's done that in 10, 11 laps. She'll be out to qualify later. And the day went by and she was never out again. So what the reason was, we still don't know. And apparently it was anywhere between, Foyt said he was curious to see what she could do. That may be part of it. Then also Rolla Volstead, the car owner, had sort of become her manager. And there was an opportunity for her to drive in the World 600 at Charlotte. But Humpy Wheeler wanted to know more about her. And so Volstead, this is another version, confirmed, don't know, go on Wikipedia, figure it out for yourself, that Volstead went to Foyt and said, can we get her in one of your cars for just a few laps so that Humpy Wheeler can see that she can drive a race car? Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But anyway, she did those laps, and I remember it was really exciting when each lap was getting faster and she's getting closer and closer to what it was going to take. So anyway, the reason for the yellow was that Hurtubise had dropped an oil line or something. Hurtubise was out with the Mallard, and something happened which put the yellow on. And so Frankie Delroy told me this. He said, I'm on the headset. And he said, the yellow goes on. And Foyt comes over and says, what's the yellow for? And he said, it's Herc, H-E-R-K. Foyt didn't hear the K. And seriously. And apparently he said, no, Hurtubise. Oh. But he thought Frankie had said it's her. And oh my God. But anyway, so why the rest of the day went on and she never came back. To this day, I still don't know the story. Horrendous name dropping here. I spent some time with Foyt this morning, and I never thought to ask him that.
Did Janet race in the World 600 then?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Then it worked.
It worked. In fact, she ran, she was the NASCAR Rookie of the Race in several events. I think she was 18th in points, driving a stock car. And so there were several great stories about that she told me about how that not everybody down south was real thrilled about having a female. And she told me this one, and I don't remember what track this was, but she said they had a pit steward named Sarge, a big burly guy that you wouldn't mess with, and you kind of needed that down there. Anyway, she said, I came in after a practice run, and she said, I misjudged my speed a little bit, and she said, I hit the brakes, and I did a 180 and stopped. And she said, I'm facing backwards up the pit lane, and Sarge comes down and puts his arm up on the thing, looks in the window and says, well, what happened to you, little lady, or something like that. And she said, oh, I just heard about those moonshine 180s, and I was going to see if I could do one. Sure, yeah. Anyway, she got a little bit of grief to go back to the situation. Fortunately, she had a thick skin, and which was probably needed. And some of the stuff that they heard was, race fans would say, oh, we hope you wreck in front of us so we can see it, and all this, just unthinking, And she was probably, I think she was a little bit of a turnoff for some people, and I don't mean this in a derogatory fashion. She was very well educated. And I think that she even ramped it up a little bit for the interviews. She wanted to be as eloquent as possible. Not everybody wanted to hear that. And but anyway, she still, she came back the next year, made the race, finished 9th in 78, and then it came out later that she had actually tripped a couple of days before the 78 race at a charity tennis match. And she had tripped and landed and cracked her wrist. She told a friend, I've done myself an injury, let's go get bandaged. And so the friend had said, well, let's go to the doctor. And she said, no, because we've come too far. I can't miss it. Well, as it turns out, she may have got some inside help with the bandage, and that's all I'll say about that. But the fact is that she effectively drove the 78 race single-handed, because the other hand was in, I forget which broke. I think she drove with the left, and the right was in the cast, or the other, I don't know. But anyway, so it was quite a performance, and I'm a big Janet Guthrie fan. I got a lot of stories about her, but I'm not going to do them now. It is 20 to 8, and I lied when I said I'd stop at 7:30. All right, Scott, yeah.
She finished 11th in 1980, the World 600.
What now?
She finished 11th in 1980, the World 600.
Oh, she was 11th in the World 680. I think she was the rookie of the race in the Daytona 500. But all right, one quick one to end up, and then we should wind down. I really enjoyed it. Way in the back, yes, sir.
Do you have a favorite story or interaction with Mario?
I'm terrible. I talked to Mario on the phone 3 times this morning. So I schmoozed with Foyt and Mario, and then also Shane Carson, and then Paul Goldsmith called, and I really didn't have time to talk to him. And I thought, boy, this is awful. I don't have time to talk to Paul Goldsmith, no. But Mario, I can't think of a funny one right off the bat, but I have all the admiration in the world for him and his diversity, and the fact that he could do so many, not only could, but was doing so many disciplines all at the same time. Over such a long period, it's just phenomenal how he could jump from one thing to another in the same weekend. I mean, run a USAC Silver Crown car and an SCCA Formula 5000 car, on the same weekend. In 1967, he won the Daytona 500, and then as it turns out, 4 weeks later, he shared the winning car at the Sebring 12 Hours. I thought it was 3 weeks, and when I was checking the dates recently for the upcoming exhibit, it turned out that Daytona in '67, they had a fuel contamination problem, and so they had to postpone it a week. And he was already committed to drive for Holman and Moody at the Atlanta 500, and so he drove at Sebring on Saturday with Bruce McLaren and won the 12 Hours of Sebring, which was 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, and then left to go to Atlanta to drive in a NASCAR race the next day. Is anybody doing that anymore? No. And and I could go on and on with stories like that, but just the sheer diversity. I've been blessed to spend a lot of time with Mario, and he's a really interesting guy. And I don't even know, other than the diversity, what I find really exceptional is that they came to this country in 1955, and they didn't speak English. And they went to Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and he actually had to learn English. And yet in 1965, he's the Rookie of the Year in the 500, and he's the USAC National Champion, and he's on the talk shows, and he's such an entertaining after-dinner speaker or accepting speaker. He was always funny. And I thought, you know what? 10 years before that, he didn't even understand the language. So just a world-class guy, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to wind up with this one. It's a 7:45, and had some what now?
Don't look at the clock.
Don't look at the clock, I know. But it's been, we've been on the go recently. In fact, tomorrow morning I'm going up to Toledo for the day. And then Monday we'll be in St. Louis, and then off the road for a little while. So we've kind of really been hammering it recently. But this was really fun tonight, and thank you all for coming out. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. If you want to be a yellow shirt, come and see me. And is that still running? Yes. Oh, too bad. Then I can't give you my closing line. I have a closing line, but you're going to have to turn that off. Yeah, all right then? All right.
Donald, real quick, can you tell everyone when your show starts on the radio?
Well, all right, thank you. May 6th, Talk of the Gasoline Alley. All right, now that's off. You're still looking in the viewfinder. I'm in an interesting situation here. We've been out on the road visiting NBC affiliates and telling them the race has moved from ABC to NBC. But while I'm doing that, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I work for the track. Shouldn't we be saying, don't watch TV, buy a ticket and go to the race? That's number one. Or, I'm on the radio network. NBC took our booth. We got a new booth this year, and it'll be fine. But I've had a lot of fun with it. I thought, I hope my mates on the network don't find out that I'm doing this, because we don't want you to watch NBC. We want you to listen to the radio. But anyway, it's all in good fun. But thank you for asking. Yes, we are doing the Talk of Gasoline Alley. It's not WIBC anymore, but it's still 1070 AM. And apparently we start on Monday, May 6th, and it will be from 8 to 9. I really miss 6 to 7 in the garage area, but it's okay because I don't know how many people listen to the radio live. I know some do, but most of them just download it and listen to it later. But anyway, before we get out of here and have to be out of here in just a little over 10 minutes, I'll be happy to do one-on-ones, converse with you a little bit. I took some pot shots here, or at least did some one-liners, because I just, but hopefully that stays within the four walls. If that gets out, what I said about NBC, that could backfire on me, but one of these days, I'm going to do a real talk show, but anyway. Where I will be able to give you more specific answers to some of your questions about the personalities. But anyway, thank you all for coming. Loved it. Thank you.